as Ukraine announces a fresh $2.3 billion payout from the European Union. Europe's internal war over funding Kyiv is exploding. What Brussels calls solidarity, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán calls a reckless gravy train that EU leaders refuse to shut down. Ukraine's government says the money is the sixth regular tranche under the EU's Ukraine facility, unlocked after Kyiv completed 8 reform steps. Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko claims more than 60 reform measures have now been implemented, calling it proof of Ukraine's commitment to its European course, even as the war grinds on. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, the EU has sent Ukraine more than $70 billion in financial support. Over $28 billion has already been disbursed this year alone. Brussels says the funds are critical to keeping Ukraine's economy afloat and ensuring macro-financial stability during wartime. But behind the announcements, EU officials admit the cost is mounting. Leaders have agreed to raise $90 billion in common debt to finance Ukraine's war effort, with EU taxpayers expected to pay around $3 billion a year in interest alone. Ukraine would only repay the loan if Russia ends the war and pays reparations, a scenario many in Brussels privately admit may never happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, money is needed to build roads, and money is available if we do not allow it to be taken away from us. I say this because I have just returned from Brussels, where a small country called Ukraine is seeking to absorb enormous sums of money. And in Brussels, some so-called wise gentlemen have decided to grant Ukraine a $90 billion loan, apparently hoping it will be repaid one day with interest.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has launched a blistering attack on the plan, accusing Brussels of gambling with public money. Speaking after EU talks, Orbán warned the $90 billion loan would disappear into the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs, arguing Hungary's share could have funded major domestic infrastructure instead of, in his words, being wasted on ruins.
In other words, we would have had to hand over to Brussels an amount equivalent to the entire construction cost of this highway. Ladies and gentlemen, that money is far better spent here on the Great Plain, on modern roads, than wasted on ruins or disappearing into the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs.
As Ukraine continues to receive billions, Europe faces a growing backlash over who pays, who decides, and how long the war economy can be sustained.